What's up, Germany? This is Seth. Before we get started in the main video, I wanted to give you an update on the attack at the Christopher Street Day on Saturday. Today is Monday, July 27th, and it is 10:30, so everything that I'm going to tell you is current as of now. The search for the principal subject is over, the casualty figure has risen, and Germany's federal prosecutor has taken control of the investigation. Investigators say a white van came from the direction of Potsdamer Platz and drove along the Ahornsteig in a Tiergarten at about 10 o'clock Saturday night, striking people before crashing into a tree. Police are also examining reports that people were attacked with a bladed weapon after the crash. One woman was killed. Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt says 29 other people were injured, some seriously. Police said Sunday afternoon that none of the hospitalized victims remained in a life-threatening condition. Police located the 21-year-old suspect known as Abdul B in an allotment garden in Spandau at about 6 o'clock Sunday night. Police say he ran toward members of Berlin's Special Operations Forces with a bladed weapon. Officers shot him and he died at the scene despite them trying to resuscitate him. Authorities say Abdul B was already known to police and domestic intelligence as a radicalized Islamist security threat. He had been convicted in May after repeated attempts to join the so-called Islamic State abroad and received a youth sentence of 1 year and 10 months. He was released under a preliminary probation arrangement with an obligation to take part in a de-radicalization program. Reporting by ARD says he had also been partly observed and his phone monitored. Dobrindt says everything currently points to an Islamist terrorist attack. The federal prosecutor has taken over and is investigating whether there were accomplices, backers, or others with advanced knowledge. The possible role of a second person and whether the CSD itself was the specific target have not been conclusively established. Now, officials say there is no indication of a continuing threat, as Berlin mourns the woman who was murdered and supports those who were injured. CSD organizers are urging people not to exploit the attack for political purposes or to place entire communities under suspicion. I'll continue to update the story as investigators release confirmed information. In parts of the United States, people who want a child can hire an agency to match them with a woman who will carry the pregnancy. Embryos are created through IVF, lawyers negotiate a contract, money is placed in escrow, and, in many states, a court can recognize the intended parents before the child is even born. The complete process commonly costs between $150,000 and $220,000. It supports an industry of agencies, fertility clinics, egg donor programs, lawyers, insurance specialists, and professional escrow companies. The United States has consequently become a destination for international clients from countries where surrogacy is prohibited. Germany is one of those countries. Germany says surrogacy risks exploiting women and turning pregnancy into a commercial service. German doctors cannot perform it, and German agencies cannot arrange it. But Germans with sufficient money can use the American system and later seek recognition of their parenthood in Germany. One of the Germans who has done this is Jens Spahn, one of the country's most powerful conservative politicians and a prominent opponent of surrogacy. The revelation of this ended his leadership of the CDU and CSU parliamentary group, but it also exposed a much larger question. Does Germany's surrogacy program really protect women, or does it simply export the practice and reserve it for the wealthy? I'll examine that in today's episode. But first, here's what else you should know this week. The Berliner Zeitung has reported that gas prices are back over €2 per liter. On July 22nd, the national average price for premium unleaded gasoline was around €2.17. E10 was €2.12, and diesel was €2.13 per liter. One of the reasons for the spike in gas prices was the expiration of the energy tax reduction in effect between May 1st and June 30th that effectively lowered the price of gas 17 cents. The Minister of Economic Affairs, Katharina Reiche, has ruled out further government relief, citing the tight German budget situation. Under German law, gas stations are only allowed to raise prices once per day, and they do this around noon. So if you're looking to refill your tank, you may want to do it before noon. Deutsche Bahn on July 21st announced that it is banning alcohol consumption at all stations on the network in an effort to improve security and cleanliness for passengers and employees. Stations, bars, and restaurants will be exempt from the ban. The ban will be incrementally introduced to all 5,400 stations in Germany by October 15th. Bans have already been introduced at 30 stations, among them in Cologne, Hamburg, and Munich. The Berlin Hauptbahnhof and Gesundbrunnen stations will introduce the ban on September 1st. A spokesperson for Deutsche Bahn said that in-station caterers will be exempted from the ban, and people will still be allowed to carry closed bottles and cans of alcohol in their luggage or shopping bags. The ban will not apply on board the trains. The German Economic Institute reported on July 20th that advertised asking rents for newly available properties rose 4% year-on-year in the second quarter of 2026. The steepest increases were recorded in large cities outside Germany's biggest metropolitan areas, where rents rose 4.9%. In Cologne, rents rose 7.9%, while Hamburg saw an increase of 5.5%. The rises were much more modest in Stuttgart and Berlin, where the rent rose 0.9% and 1% respectively. Last May, Peter Fitzek, the so-called King of Germany, was arrested along with 3 others, and the Reichsbürger group Kingdom of Germany was banned. On July 22nd, Fitzek and the others arrested were formally charged by Germany's highest prosecuting authority, accusing them of being ringleaders in a criminal organization. Fitzek is also charged with operating an illegal insurance business and numerous cases of tax evasion. According to prosecutors, the Kingdom of Germany, also known as the KRD, financed itself through unauthorized banking and insurance transactions, as well as donations, gifts, and paid seminars. Between 2020 and 2025, the organization received approximately 10 million euros. The KRD was founded in 2012 in Wittenberg in Saxony-Anhalt and saw itself as an independent state with its own constitution and currency. The KRD claims membership of 6,000 followers at the time of its banning, but authorities say the number is closer to 1,000. The deadline for filing your 2025 tax return is July 31st for mandatory filers who are preparing their tax returns themselves. So make sure you get your taxes filed. Torsten Frey is expected to become the new leader of the CDU and CSU parliamentary group. And the reason that job is vacant brings us to today's main story: Jens Spahn, surrogacy, and a contradiction at the heart of German law. Surrogacy in the United States is not governed by federal law, and the laws on surrogacy vary from state to state. Some states have detailed laws requiring gestational surrogacy agreements, others impose restrictions, refuse to enforce certain agreements, or provide far less certainty. This state-by-state system is important because America's appeal to international clients is that in selected states, an entire professional system has developed around making that process legally predictable. Now, the process usually begins with the intended parents. They might be a heterosexual couple unable to carry a pregnancy, a single intended parent, or a same-sex couple. They normally approach a surrogacy agency, a fertility clinic, or both. The agency helps coordinate the process and match them with a woman who agrees to carry and give birth to the child. You will often hear that woman called a surrogate mother, but most American agencies prefer the term gestational carrier because in the most common form of modern surrogacy, she does not provide the egg and is not genetically related to the child. The genetic material can come from several different sources. The intended parent may provide the egg and the sperm. One intended parent may provide the sperm, while the egg comes from a donor, or both the egg and sperm may come from donors. For a male couple, one may provide the sperm while an egg donor and gestational carrier perform 2 completely different roles. The egg donor provides the genetic material while the gestational carrier carries the pregnancy. That distinction is central to the American system. It is different from traditional surrogacy in which the woman carrying the pregnancy also provides the egg. Traditional arrangements present more complicated legal and emotional questions and are restricted or treated differently in several states. This story is primarily about gestational surrogacy, the model promoted by most American agencies. Before an embryo is transferred, the participants ordinarily pass through an extensive screening process. Professional medical guidance recommends reviewing the carrier's health and previous pregnancies, conducting infectious disease testing, and completing a psychological evaluation. Intended parents and anyone providing eggs or sperm also undergo relevant medical testing. The carrier and intended parent are then matched. Both sides normally review information about the other, speak with each other, and decide if they are comfortable. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine recommends comprehensive medical and psychological screening, informed consent, and independent legal advice. But these professional recommendations are not the same as one binding national surrogacy law. The actual legal requirements are still governed by the different states. Once a match is accepted, the lawyers get involved. The intended parent and carrier should have separate legal representation. Their lawyers negotiate a surrogacy agreement covering compensation, expenses, insurance, and the responsibilities of everyone involved. It may also cover subjects that are intensely personal: prenatal testing, communication during the pregnancy, the possibility of multiple embryos, complications, miscarriages, and decisions surrounding abortion. But a contract cannot turn the carrier's body over to the intended parent. She remains the person who consents or refuses medical treatment throughout the pregnancy. Professional ethics guidance says that medical decisions ultimately belong to her, from the embryo transfer through childbirth and aftercare. This is one of the fundamental tensions with surrogacy. The intended parents are planning for a future child, but the carrier remains the patient. Before medical treatment begins, the intended parents generally place money into an independently managed escrow account. Payments are then distributed according to the contract. Those may include the carrier's base compensation, maternity clothing, travel, child care, lost wages, medical expenses, and additional payments for procedures or complications. The money is only one part of a much larger financial structure. The intended parents may also pay the agency, the fertility clinic, egg donor program, lawyers, insurance specialists, and the escrow company. Some arrangements include no separate profit or base payment for the carrier. These are generally described as altruistic surrogacy, but altruistic does not mean cost-free. Medical treatments, lawyers, insurance, and pregnancy-related expenses must still be paid, and the professionals surrounding the agreement may still earn money. After the legal agreement is signed and the financial arrangements are in place, the medical process can begin. Eggs are fertilized in a laboratory through in vitro fertilization, or IVF. An embryo is then transferred into the carrier's uterus. A transfer does not guarantee pregnancy. It may take more than one attempt, increasing the time, medical intervention, and total cost. If a pregnancy begins, the carrier receives ordinary prenatal care, although the agency and intended parents may remain closely involved. During the pregnancy, the legal work continues. In states with established surrogacy laws, the intended parents may ask for a court to declare them the child's legal parents. Depending on the state and circumstances, that can occur before or after birth. California, for example, has statutes governing assisted reproduction agreements and the establishing of parentage. New York requires particular contractual safeguards and gives gestational carriers a statutory Bill of Rights, including independent legal counsel and control over their own healthcare decisions. These are examples, not a description of the entire country. The location matters. The wording of the contract matters. And the procedures required to establish legal parentage matters. For American intended parents, the parentage order and birth certificate may complete most of the legal process. For international parents, the birth can begin another one. They must obtain documents allowing the child to travel and to convince authorities in their own countries to recognize the American parentage determination. A court order that is valid in the United States does not automatically erase another country's laws on motherhood, citizenship, or surrogacy. That means that international surrogacy is really a legal bridge between two systems that may define the same family in very different ways, thereby making surrogacy not just a journey in the United States to have a child. So why do international parents accept this risk? Because in selected states, the US offers something many countries do not: a commercial infrastructure, access for same-sex couples, and a comparatively well-established legal framework for establishing parentage. But that predictability comes at an extraordinary price, and it raises a more uncomfortable question. When pregnancy becomes a service coordinated by agencies, contracts, and six-figure price tags, exactly what is being purchased and who carries the risk? This is where we need to look next. For international clients, the appeal of the United States is not that every state permits surrogacy. They select states where the rules are comparatively clear, agencies and fertility clinics routinely handle international cases, and same-sex couples and single people can establish legal parenthood. They're buying access, but they're also buying coordination and a degree of legal predictability. That does not guarantee that their parenthood will be recognized when they return home, but it can give them a court order, birth certificate, and travel documents before they leave the United States. And that predictability is very expensive. The legal predictability is available primarily to people with substantial financial resources. A complete American surrogacy arrangement can cost well into six figures. The exact amount varies enormously, and we don't know what Jens Spahn and Daniel Funke paid in their own case. But the central point is not the precise bill. Germany's prohibition does not prevent every German from pursuing surrogacy. It prevents those who cannot afford to travel abroad and navigate an expensive international system. Surrogacy therefore remains possible, but disproportionately for the wealthy. And that is what makes Spahn's case politically significant. He could personally access an option that his party wants to keep unavailable inside Germany. The money determines who can access the system, but it does not tell us who carries the risk. Agencies often present gestational surrogacy as a carefully screened partnership between consenting adults. And many carriers describe the decision positively, as a way to help another family while earning money for their own. That agency matters. A woman is not necessarily being exploited simply because she chooses to be compensated for pregnancy. But calling the arrangement voluntary does not make the imbalance disappear. The intended parents assume substantial financial and emotional risk. They may spend enormous sums without actually obtaining a child. The gestational carrier assumes something different: the physical risk of IVF medication, embryo transfer, pregnancy, and childbirth. No contract can transfer those risks to the intended parents. Even a healthy pregnancy can result in high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, hemorrhage, emergency surgery, or long-term complications. Research specifically on gestational carriers remains limited, but recent evidence gives reason for caution. A 2024 systematic review found that gestational carrier pregnancies had higher odds of hypertensive disorders than pregnancies overall, although some other outcomes were comparable to pregnancies conceived through assisted reproduction. A large Canadian study also found higher rates of severe maternal complications, hypertensive disorders, and postpartum hemorrhage among gestational carriers. These studies show associations. They do not prove that surrogacy itself caused every additional complication. But they challenge the idea that careful screening makes the medical risk negligible. That creates a tension that no legal document can completely resolve. The intended parents understandably believe decisions about the fetus concern their future child, but the pregnancy is taking place inside someone else's body. Compensation creates another difficult question. Supporters argue that payment recognizes the carrier's time, discomfort, restrictions, and the risk they take. Expecting her to undergo pregnancy without meaningful compensation could itself be exploitative, especially while agencies, lawyers, and clinics are getting paid. Critics answer that sufficiently high compensation can recruit women precisely because they need the money. A contract may be freely signed in a legal sense, while still being shaped by unequal wealth. The intended parents may be affluent international clients capable of spending well into six figures. The carrier may view the payment as a way to clear debt, afford housing, or improve her family's circumstances. That does not mean she is incapable of choosing. It means that the choice cannot be separated entirely from the economic conditions in which it is made. And that is the central ethical problem. Pay too little, and society asks a woman to assume months of labor and medical risk while everyone around her earns money. Pay substantially more, and the offer becomes most attractive to women for whom refusing it is financially difficult. Calling the arrangement altruistic does not eliminate that contradiction. Calling it commercial does not prove that the carrier lacks agency. The real question is whether regulation can preserve meaningful choice when the people commissioning the pregnancy possess far more money and when only one person's body is placed at risk. Germany's answer has been largely to prohibit the practice, but prohibition creates its own inequality. It does not stop wealthy Germans from using surrogacy, it sends them abroad. Germany's prohibition sounds straightforward. Surrogacy is illegal. But the law is more selective than that sentence suggests. It prevents the surrogacy process from being carried out or arranged, and it does not generally punish the intended parents for traveling to a country where the process is legal. Under the Embryo Protection Act, anyone who artificially inseminates a woman who intends to surrender the child or transfer an embryo to her can face up to 3 years in prison or a fine. The law is directed principally at the medical professionals performing the procedure. It expressly exempts the gestational carrier and the intended parents from punishment under the provision. A separate law prohibits agencies from matching intended parents with gestational carriers inside Germany. Publicly advertising for a carrier or for intended parents can also be punishable. So a German fertility clinic cannot perform the procedure, and a German agency cannot legally organize the arrangement. But the intended parents themselves are not normally prosecuted simply for commissioning a lawful surrogacy abroad. That produces the cross-border system we see today. Germany law closes the clinic and the agencies at home, but someone with enough money can fly out to California or another jurisdiction, use the commercial system there, and return with the child. The difficult legal question then becomes not whether Germany approves the arrangement, but what Germany should do about the family that now exists. Under German law, the legal mother is the woman who gives birth. That means an American birth certificate alone does not automatically resolve the matter. German authorities must determine whether an American court's parentage order should be recognized here, and the result can depend on exactly how the American process was structured. Germany's Federal Court of Justice has previously recognized foreign parentage decisions in surrogacy cases where at least one intended parent was genetically related to the child. But in May 2026, the court drew a new boundary. It ruled that Germany will generally refuse recognition when a foreign judgment assigns parenthood to intended parents who have no genetic relationship to the child. In those cases, the intended parent must establish the relationship through adoption. So recognition is possible, but it is not automatic, and the details matter: who provided the genetic material, what the foreign court decided, and whether German courts consider the result compatible with fundamental principles of German law. This may appear contradictory. Germany prohibits the creation of the arrangement, but sometimes recognizes the legal result. But refusing recognition does not undo the pregnancy. It does not send the child back or restore the situation that existed before the birth. It can instead leave a child living with the people raising them while their legal relationship remains uncertain. The courts must therefore balance two different objectives: preserving Germany's prohibition and protecting a child who played no role in circumventing it. And the present prohibition is not Germany's only constitutional permissible option. In 2024, a government-appointed commission examined whether altruistic surrogacy, without commercial compensation for carrying the pregnancy, could be legalized under strict conditions. The commission concluded that surrogacy does not inherently violate human dignity. It found that carefully regulated altruistic surrogacy could be constitutional, but it also concluded that the government could constitutionally retain the prohibition. In other words, Germany is not compelled by its constitution either to legalize surrogacy or to ban it. This is a political decision about which risks the state considers greater and whether regulation can manage them. The current system therefore makes two decisions at once. It says surrogacy is too dangerous or exploitative to organize within Germany, but it leaves open a route through countries willing to organize it, and that route is available overwhelmingly to people who can afford international travel, specialist lawyers, and a six-figure American process. Germany has not eliminated surrogacy for Germans. It has outsourced it. And one of the people able to use that outsourced system was also one of Germany's most powerful political defenders of keeping surrogacy prohibited. His name was Jens Spahn. Jens Spahn and his husband, journalist Daniel Funke, announced in July that they had become parents to a son born through a gestational carrier in the United States. Their child had been legally born under American law. Spahn and Funke had not committed a crime by becoming parents through surrogacy abroad, and their family does deserve the same privacy, security, and respect as any other family. But Jens Spahn was not simply a private German citizen taking advantage of another country's laws. He was the parliamentary leader of the governing CDU and CSU, and one of Germany's most powerful conservative politicians. That made his decision political. Not because he's gay, not because he wanted a child, and not because politicians can never change their mind. It became political because Spahn personally accessed an expensive route to parenthood while continuing to represent a party determined to deny that route inside Germany. And Spahn has confronted this question politically before. In a 2015 interview, he said, "As a gay man and a Christian, I personally find it very difficult to accept the idea of a rented womb. As a Christian, I think he's denying the historical precedent of a rented womb, given Jesus' claimed lineage. But we don't need to pile on the hypocrisy." But the remainder of his statement is important as well. Accepting that I will not become a father naturally requires a great degree of humility. Whether I can summon that humility, I do not know. That was not an absolute promise that he would never use surrogacy. It revealed a personal conflict and left its outcome unresolved. 11 years later, Spahn had resolved that conflict in favor of becoming a parent. People are allowed to reconsider their deeply personal decisions. The contradiction did not arise because his private thinking changed. It arose because his politics did not change with it. As federal health minister, Spahn oversaw the ministry responsible for the Embryo Protection Act. In 2020, his ministry said that the government was not planning to change the prohibition and defended it primarily in the name of the child's welfare. Then in February 2026, the CDU went further. At its national party conference, it reaffirmed its opposition not only to commercial surrogacy, but also to altruistic arrangements in which the carrier received no commercial payment. The party argued that both models presented a high risk of exploitation, circumvention, and abuse. At that time, the American gestational carrier was reportedly already pregnant with Spahn and Funke's child. Spahn was not merely an ordinary party member. He was leading the CDU and CSU parliamentary group in the Bundestag. There is no indication that he publicly challenged the resolution or used his authority to argue for a regulated alternative. After the birth became public, Spahn did not call for Germany to reconsider its policy. People around him said he did not believe that a personal experience should automatically produce a political demand. That principle can be reasonable. Legislators should not rewrite national policy merely because their own lives have changed. But this was not simply a case in which Spahn's experience failed to change his politics. He continued to support a system under which people who made less money could not make the same decisions he was able to make. Germany prohibited the clinic, the agency, and the procedures at home. Spahn and Funke possessed the resources to obtain them abroad. That is why accusations of hypocrisy became so powerful. Critics on the left accused him of using wealth and international access to circumvent a restriction his politics preserved for everyone else. Members of his own party argued that the issue has become one of credibility. CDU officials began calling for his resignation as parliamentary leader. Spahn initially defended the decision, saying that he had been torn for a long time. That answer acknowledged the personal difficulty he was facing. It did not resolve the political contradiction, though. On July 18th, Spahn resigned as a leader of the CDU and CSU parliamentary. In his resignation letter, he wrote that the divide between his private decision and the expectations attached to his political office had become greater than he anticipated. He said his family was the most important thing to him and asked that the debate remain humane in tone. Chancellor Friedrich Merz called the resignation right and unavoidable, saying that credibility is the highest good in politics. The union has since nominated Chancellery Minister Thorsten Frey to replace Spahn, with the parliamentary group expected to vote on July 29th. Spahn's resignation may have ended the immediate leadership crisis. It did not answer the underlying question: was the problem that Jens Spahn violated the moral principle behind Germany's prohibition? Or was the problem that the prohibition operates unequally, restricting surrogacy inside Germany while allowing wealthy Germans to purchase access elsewhere? These are not the same criticism. One says Spahn should have himself denied the option. The other says his ability to use it demonstrates why Germany's existing policy is incoherent. And focusing only on the hypocrisy risks allowing the German government to avoid the more difficult debate whether prohibition genuinely protects women and children, or merely relocates the practice beyond Germany's borders and beyond the reach of German safeguards. There is no simple policy that makes every ethical problem surrounding surrogacy disappear. That's just not realistic. Keeping Germany's prohibition may prevent a commercial industry from developing here. It avoids creating a market in which agencies recruit women to carry children for wealthier clients. And it reflects a legitimate concern that pregnancy should not become something another person can purchase through a contract. But prohibition has only moved the market abroad. Germany could retain its existing prohibition and attempt to make it more effective. It could discourage Germans from commissioning surrogacy abroad, restrict recognition of foreign parentage decisions, or pursue international agreements intended to suppress cross-border arrangements. But those measures would create new risks. A stricter approach would not prevent every birth. It could instead leave children in legal uncertainty. punishing them for decisions made before they existed. And wealthy intended parents would still possess the greatest ability to navigate those restrictions with specialist lawyers, foreign courts, and international travel. The alternative would be a tightly controlled altruistic system inside Germany. The woman carrying the pregnancy could receive her expenses and compensation for lost income, but not a commercial fee. Agencies could be prohibited from profiting. Independent legal advice, psychological counseling, and medical screening could be mandatory. There could be limits on who may become a carrier, a guaranteed right to make every medical decision during pregnancy, and a period in which consent could be reconsidered. Legal parenthood could be resolved through a German process designed around the child's interests. Germany's own government-appointed commission concluded in 2024 that such a system could be constitutionally permissible, but only with extensive safeguards. It also concluded that legislators could retain the ban. The Constitution does not decide this debate for them. But altruistic surrogacy is not an effortless compromise. Removing commercial compensation does not remove the medical risk. It may place pressure on sisters, friends, or other relatives to volunteer. And it raises another question. If pregnancy involves months of labor, physical restriction, and the possibility of permanent injury, why should the woman assuming the risk be the only essential participant who cannot be paid? Regulation can reduce risks. It cannot make pregnancy risk-free, eliminate every financial imbalance, or guarantee that consent will remain uncomplicated throughout the process. So this is not a choice between an ethical prohibition and an unethical market. It is a choice between different risks, and between confronting those risks inside Germany or allowing Germans with sufficient money to pursue the process somewhere else. That brings us back to Jens Spahn. His decision did not prove that surrogacy is ethical. It did not prove that every gestational carrier is exploited. And it did not mean that Germany must legalize commercial surrogacy. But it did expose the central dishonesty of the present system. Germany says surrogacy is too ethically dangerous to permit it at home, but yet it largely tolerates the predictable results when affluent Germans obtain it abroad. The prohibition is therefore not experienced equally. For most people, it means that surrogacy is unavailable. For people with enough money, it means surrogacy is available somewhere else. Spahn's resignation addressed his personal credibility. It did nothing to resolve that inequality. He was entitled to want a family. His husband and child should not be treated as political targets. And nothing about this controversy makes their family less real or less deserving of respect. But political compassion cannot operate only in one direction. If Spahn's desire to become a parent was powerful enough to justify crossing an ocean and entering a system he had publicly struggled to accept, then politicians must take equally serious the desires of people who cannot afford the escape route. The answer simply cannot be that Jens Spahn should have denied himself a family in order to remain consistent. That would preserve his consistency while leaving the underlying system untouched. The more important lesson is that moral prohibitions are easiest to defend when the consequences fall primarily on other people. Spahn's contradiction does not settle the ethical debate over surrogacy, but it reveals what Germany's prohibition permits in practice. Those with sufficient money can obtain abroad what Germany refuses to regulate at home. Germany must now decide whether it genuinely intends to prevent surrogacy, including the difficult consequences that would follow from enforcing the prohibition across borders, or whether it is prepared to regulate a limited form of it under strict safeguards. What it should not continue doing is presenting the current arrangement as a successful ban. It is not a ban. It is a border, and wealthy people know how to cross it. But what do you think Germany should do? Keep the prohibition, enforce it even across borders, or permit a strict regulation form of altruistic surrogacy here? Let me know in the comments. And please keep the discussion focused on the policy, not on Spahn's child or whether the family deserves respect. If you want clear, critical coverage of the stories shaping life and politics in Germany, subscribe to What's Up Germany. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.